Over 300 million years ago, long before birds evolved to take to the skies, a different kind of creature ruled the airwaves. And no, it wasn't a reptile. This insect's wingspan could reach 2.5 feet. That's as big as a hawk. Hi, and welcome to Paleologic. Today we are talking about this giant insect that ruled the skies before birds even existed. This is Meganeura. Number 1. Time period. Meganeura lived during the Carboniferous period, which lasted from about 360 to 299 million years ago. That puts it over 100 million years before the first dinosaurs appeared, so it was definitely not a dinosaur. During the Carboniferous, most of the land was covered in swamps and dense forests. There was also a lot more oxygen in the air than there is now. In fact, at its peak, Earth's oxygen level reached as high as 35%. For reference, today's maximum oxygen level is about 21%. Now, we talk about oxygen levels a lot here at Paleologic, and not just because I love an excuse to break out my inflatable lungs. It's because oxygen is super important for understanding evolution. You see, almost all land animals breathe through lungs, including us. But unlike us, insects don't have lungs. They exchange gases directly through their skin in a process called diffusion. And the thinner an animal's body is, the faster and more efficiently it can move gases in and out of every cell. But the bigger an animal gets, the thicker its body becomes, and the harder it is for gases to travel across that bulk. So small, thin bodies are good for environments with low oxygen levels because they allow animals to stay small without suffocating. But thick, larger bodies might work better in environments with high oxygen levels. That means that an insect living today can only be so big before it starts to suffocate. So if insects want to get bigger, they need more oxygen. And the second thing we should know about the time period in which Meganeura lived is that it was basically a birdless world. Sure, birds are related to dinosaurs, but the earliest ancestors of birds were just small feathered dinosaurs. They wouldn't evolve into actual birds for another 100 million years. So while Meganeura was flying around, there were no birds or bats around to eat it. That means it didn't have many predators to worry about. And it turns out that both lots of oxygen and no predators are great for growing big wings. See, wings don't help you fly unless you can lift them off the ground. And the heavier you are, the harder it is to get airborne. So it seems like flying animals must always be stuck on the ground until they evolve lighter bones or feathers that gave them an advantage. But if you're big and your habitat has tons of oxygen, then getting airborne isn't such a problem. It turns out that all these factors may have combined to let meganeuroids get really, really big, which brings us to number 2. What was Meganeura? Meganeura was a type of insect called an odonate, and odonates are still around today. Their closest relatives are dragonflies and darners. So you might be picturing a really big dragonfly, and that's not too far off. Meganeuras were giant dragonflies. Okay, fine. Meganeras are officially defined by the shape of their skulls and their unique mouth structure. So it's technically possible that some undiscovered insect from the Carboniferous was also a Meganeuro. But since we haven't found any other Meganeuro skulls that look exactly alike, we tend to use the term Meganeuro to describe these giant dragonflies. Speaking of size, these dragonflies could grow to enormous proportions. The largest species, Meganeura manyi, had a wingspan of up to 2.5 feet or 75 centimeters. That's as big as a hawk. The average size of a hawk is about 2.4 feet, which makes sense because they're closely related. And Meganeura was one of the largest flying insects that ever lived. For comparison, the largest flying insect alive today has a wingspan of about 1 foot. But don't let its size fool you. While they did have giant wings, Meganeura probably weren't that good at flying. See, the way an animal uses its muscles to move its wings determines how it flies. If you move your wings like this, you'll probably go straight up. And if you move your wings like this, you'll probably fly backwards. And if you move your wings like this, well, you'll probably just fall on your face. So the way an animal moves its wings determines how it flies. The way a bird flies is very different from the way a bee flies. That's because birds and bees have different body shapes and sizes and different muscle attachments. And scientists think Meganeura were built differently than modern dragonflies. They probably had slower metabolisms and larger, heavier bodies. All of that suggests that instead of being agile flyers, Meganeura were probably built for soaring, like a giant prehistoric condor. And speaking of soaring, it turns out that condors aren't the only ones who like to spend a lot of time in the air. Number 3. Hunting. So we've established that Meganeura were large and probably not that nimble. So what did they do? Well, we can make a few educated guesses. First, since they lived in a birdless world, there were no predators swooping around trying to pick them off. So Meganeura could rule the skies without worrying about being hunted themselves. That means that when they flew, they were likely hunting. But they couldn't chase down their prey like peregrine falcons, because remember, they were built for soaring. So they probably spent a lot of time just floating around in the air, waiting for their food to come to them. What that food was is another educated guess. Since we know that Meganeura were related to dragonflies, it's likely that they ate the same things that dragonflies eat today. Smaller flying insects like mayflies and moths. And yes, I know that dragonflies eat mosquitoes, and I think that's wonderful. But don't forget, the Carboniferous had its own mosquitoes. After all, it was full of swampy areas that looked like perfect mosquito habitat. Plus, there were probably lots of other insects for Meganeura to feed on thanks to the high oxygen levels. As I mentioned earlier, the Carboniferous is sometimes referred to as the age of giant insects. It was home to giant cockroaches and even giant spiders. So it looks like lots of animals got to grow to enormous sizes. We don't know exactly what Meganeura ate, though. We do know that they had strong mandibles, so they could probably eat more than just soft-bodied insects. It's possible that they also fed on small amphibians, and that would make sense. After all, amphibians were evolving rapidly during the Carboniferous. They were moving on land, and some species had even started to breathe air. So there were probably plenty of small amphibians around that Meganeura could catch. Imagine a world where the biggest threat to your life is a giant dragonfly. That's why it's so important to learn about Meganeura. Studying extinct creatures like them helps us understand what kinds of threats might be facing species today. And it turns out that these giant dragonflies were perfectly adapted to their environment. But they disappeared anyway. No. For why did it disappear? Meganeura were successful. They had few predators and plenty of food. So why did they disappear? Well, there are 3 main theories. First, oxygen levels dropped as the Carboniferous came to a close, and that would have limited how large insects could grow. Remember, insects breathe through their skin, and if they get too big, it takes too long for gases to reach their cells. So as the amount of oxygen in the air decreased, natural selection started favoring smaller insects. Second, vertebrates evolved. The Carboniferous started with the first 4-footed vertebrates moving onto land, and it ended with early reptiles evolving and eventually the first birds taking to the skies. And while these animals didn't cause the extinction of all insects, they did push many of them out of the skies. Remember, insects can't soar like birds, so early reptiles and birds were probably better hunters. Third, plants changed. Insects are totally dependent on plants. They're either eating them or eating something that ate them. So when plants change, it's bound to affect insects. In fact, we know that during the Carboniferous, plants started to develop tougher leaves and woody stems. Tougher leaves mean less food, and woody stems meant that insects could no longer lay their eggs inside of plants like they used to. All these changes in vegetation may have driven many insects out of the sky and perhaps led to the decline of Meganeura. But regardless of the reason, Meganeura disappeared around 300 million years ago. And since then, no insect has been able to grow that big again. No, 5. Why it still matters. Maybe you're thinking, okay, so what? Who cares if we learned about a giant insect from 300 million years ago? Isn't it just cool? But learning about creatures like Meganeura is important for lots of reasons. The Earth's atmosphere is changing all the time. We've been adding carbon dioxide and pollutants. So by studying how life adapted to past atmospheres, we can learn how our own actions are affecting the planet. Plus, it reminds us that some extreme adaptations are only possible under extreme conditions. So while I wouldn't expect to see giant dragonflies anytime soon, who knows what kinds of weird adaptations might arise in the future if the oxygen levels rise again. Meganeura is often brought up in discussions about whether giant insects could ever return. If you want to hear my thoughts on that, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for coming along on this journey through time. If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. And if you want to learn more about giant ancient insects, check out the episode we did about the giant bird-eating spider. Thanks for coming along on this journey through time. I'll see you next time on Palo World.